This is a real-life, 20,000-year-old, give or take, woolly mammoth tooth, and this is an enormous woolly mammoth tooth, even by woolly mammoth teeth standards, and technically speaking, this is also a woolly mammoth tooth, and in this video, I'm going to restore these teeth, and if you want to know why, it is a f***ing woolly mammoth tooth. Let's go! Over 3 years ago now, I bought this 115-pound woolly mammoth tusk from a guy up in Alaska for $7,000. And I already know what you're wondering. You are wondering, where did you get $7,000? And that's a fair question, and for tax purposes, I can't divulge that. But what I can tell you is I had maybe the most fun on this project of any project I've ever attempted. This was one of my all-time favorite videos, and I learned a ton through this process. And one of the things I learned is the people in the video comments apparently know way more about restoring fossils and tusks and teeth and things like that than I do, so I want to thank all of them for showing me everything I did wrong. And I did a few things right, but I did in fact make a few mistakes along the way, so I'm going to use some of those skills on restoring these teeth and hopefully not make those same mistakes. What I'm doing here is actually a slightly different process than when I first started restoring that woolly mammoth tusk. And anytime you get one of these old relics, and I have to be very careful not to say the word fossil because no, these do not technically qualify as fossils, but anytime you get one of these old organic pieces, they tend to be fairly just crumbly and beat up, and I want to retain as much of the natural material as I can. So with the mammoth tusk, what I did is I just kind of stabilized everything with epoxy, and it seemed to work pretty well, but apparently what the actual experts use is this CA glue, particularly the thin stuff, because this is probably more thin than water, so it does a really good job at just soaking into all those cracks and crevices and gives you just a really good starting point. I'm not sure how many of you out there are going straight from this video to restoring your own mammoth teeth and tusks, but if there's even one of you, I feel obligated to say this, and that is before you start any restoration process, you need to make sure your teeth and or tusks are completely dry, because these sit in the permafrost, they soak up that moisture over the thousands of years, and they're wet just like wood is wet, and so they actually need to dry out to get to that kind of equilibrium moisture content. Again, just like a piece of wood before you start working on it. And in the case of that mammoth tusk, what I did is I set it in kind of a cool place in my house that retains temperature of about 55 degrees or so for about a year, and I had hose clamps on it, and I just continued to tighten those hose clamps every couple of weeks, or actually about every week for a little bit over a year. And these teeth, however, they actually came pre-dried. My mammoth guy, and yes, I do have a mammoth guy, he told me these were completely dry and ready to work on. The tooth that I'm working on here is one of the upper molars. I can't remember if it's the right or left side, but I believe my mammoth guy said that because this one weighed over 16 pounds, that it was the second biggest one he'd ever come across. And you could have told me that the average mammoth molar size was 50 pounds and I would have believed it. But the fact that he told me this was one of the biggest ones he's ever come across and he is a professional mammoth guy, I was all in and I had to have it. The process that I'm doing here is another one of those steps that is significantly different than when I restored that mammoth tusk. And both of them have a lot of cracks, but the cracks in that tusk I ended up filling with a combination of epoxy and what is called bone ash. And if you don't know, it's exactly what it sounds like. It is burnt bone, and I read somewhere online that it makes a good enamel filler. But the problem is, at least the bone ash that I had was filled with these little flecks of bone that just didn't quite look right. It wasn't perfectly smooth, and I was able to end up blending the color to make it look pretty good, but if I was going to do it again, this is what I would use. What I'm using here is a silica filler, and this stuff is insanely strong. When I mix up a cup of this, after I'm done and it cures, that cup I can barely crush with my hand. So I have no question that this silica filler will absolutely hold this tooth together till the end of time. But the reason why I'm really excited about this is it should do an excellent job at accepting color and make it really blend in the end. And unfortunately though, I do not have any contacts from the Smithsonian in my speed dial, and this is not anything anybody showed me. So I'm kind of using that think about it logic, just hoping that this is gonna be fine in the end, and should be fine, right? If you are watching this video and thinking, I need to own a mammoth tooth or tusk, I get it. Nobody gets it more than me. I have been in that position myself. I do have some suggestions for you though, and that is to attempt to try and stick to the reputable websites or auctions, because there are these mammoth body part Facebook groups, and it's not as weird as it sounds. Maybe it is as weird as it sounds. Anyway, I'm a member of these groups on Facebook where people post tusks and teeth that they find or come across and offer to sell them, and usually way cheaper than those reputable websites. The problem is many of them are complete scammers who either don't have a tusk or have no intention of shipping you what you ordered, and best case scenario is they make off with your money, and worst case, they steal your entire identity or gain access to your bank account when you attempt a wire transfer. And just like they warned you about STDs when you were younger, the only way to be 100% safe is through abstinence. But just like with unprotected sex, sometimes the Mammoth siren song is just too tempting and you might mess up and expose yourself to a virus. Computer virus, that is. Or a scammer that sells your information online like that girl in Taken. That is where this video sponsor, Incogni, comes in. And if you don't know, Incogni scours the internet to get your information removed from data brokers who sell that information to companies and individuals who you definitely don't want in possession of any personal data. And in addition to that, they also have a custom removals tool now. So if you find your information listed somewhere online, you can copy that link, give it to Incogni to remove on your behalf. So stick it to those dark web mammoth brokers and take your personal data back with Incogni. Use code UNCUT at the link below to get 60% off an annual plan at incogni.com/uncut. You can try it out risk-free for 30 days, and if you don't like it, you'll get a full refund. When I got to the sanding and grinding stage of restoring that mammoth tusk, I was extraordinarily nervous because I had no idea what I was doing, so I started pretty slow, and it didn't take me very long to realize that I was going to need to put a lot more horsepower behind it or it was going to take me forever. So I just broke out the angle grinder and started grinding away, and I stand by this. I think this was the proper way to restore that tusk, in spite of how many comments I got saying the opposite, saying that I ruined it. But what I didn't want is I didn't want a big, rough, textured, crumbly tusk. What I wanted was something that looks like it would actually be on a woolly mammoth or an elephant, and in the end, that's exactly what I got. However, for these teeth, I don't want to go too aggressive. I'm going to do some sanding on it, but there's so many kind of fine contours that I want to go a little bit more delicate, and I just don't know what tool is going to be best to achieve that look. And I decided to restore each of these mammoth teeth in very different ways to kind of help me decide what my particular mammoth tooth style is and maybe help you with your fossil journey. And for this one, I decided I am going to go all the way with it, meaning I'm going to polish this thing up like a jewel, and right there, that is not nearly good enough. We're starting to take a little bit of that outer layer off, but I want to sand this thing all the way down, throw it on a buffing wheel, and polish it up as glossy as physically possible. That larger, more dramatic tooth though, I think I want to do it a little bit different. I'm going to keep it much more natural, and if I don't like the way the natural looks in the end, I can always grind it down and polish it up like this one, but this one, I won't be able to go back and do it the other way. I was feeling pretty good about how that smaller tooth was looking. You could really start to see the different layers of the tooth, the cementum and the dentine and the enamel. But like I mentioned, this bigger one, I want to attempt to keep it more natural. So you're going to see more of that cementum, that kind of brown layer on the outside. And I found through this process that using these non-woven pads, that's kind of the fancy name for these Scotch-Brite pads, is really the best way to kind of maintain the contour of it, not remove too much, but really do a good job at cleaning it up. I know this looks crazy aggressive, but I swear it isn't. It's a pretty soft pad. This is a green non-woven pad, and if you didn't know, the colors of these pads correspond to the kind of grit equivalent on how aggressive they are. So this one isn't too aggressive, and truth be told, I probably got way too much epoxy on this tooth, so most of the grinding I'm doing is just kind of removing that excess epoxy. I'm not really removing much of the cementum or really even getting into the enamel here. Aside from some grinding and polishing tools, there is a shocking lack of woodworking equipment in this video. In spite of that, depending on when you're watching this, and if you're interested in things like my Damascus marking knife, my epoxy workshop, N3 Nano, and my new N0 wood cleaner, and the lowest price on Total Boat epoxy on the internet, I am just about to have my biggest sale of the year for Black Friday. Not only that, but it's the biggest discount I have ever offered on any of these items. There's a QR code on screen and a link in the video description for more details, but do not wait until I am sold out. Supplies are definitely limited. Grinding and sanding down that flattish surface on the top was easy enough, but these roots have a lot of really cool character that I'm starting to see, and I still want this to be completely polished, but I want to maintain all of those subtle little ridges like you see there. So these are some pretty cool little wheels that I found. I got these on Amazon. It was like 500 of them for $7, which seems great, but the problem is they do not last very long. I just kept churning through these things, and yes, they weren't expensive, but they were pretty much a pain to use, and they did an excellent job though, because I could actually sand this all the way down without really hurting any of those ridges. I have a fairly unpopular opinion that I cannot wrap my head around why it is an actual unpopular opinion, and that is, why is everybody not obsessed with collecting body parts like I am? That didn't come out right. You know what I mean. I don't understand why everybody doesn't collect mammoth teeth and mammoth tusks and T-Rex skulls and things like that, and I know what some of you are going to say is, oh, they do. They have auctions and they sell for a lot of money. But not as much money as they should. If a Jackson Pollock painting can sell for $50 million, then a T-Rex skull should sell for $1 billion. If a banana taped to the wall can sell for $5 million, then a mammoth tooth should be a fucking $1 trillion. This is something I am very passionate about and I cannot wrap my head around, but I would like to know, what other unpopular opinions do you guys have out there that maybe I wouldn't understand? Do you guys have weird collections, things that would creep you out? Because I am obsessed with the natural world. I have an alligator skull in my house. I have a mammoth tusk. I have mammoth teeth now, and I just cannot see why everybody wouldn't want this stuff. These little green imitation ceramic die grinder things are another one of those Amazon purchases where it seems like a good deal. You get, 540 of them for $7 and it will be there in an hour and a half. And they actually did a pretty good job at accomplishing what I needed to accomplish, but I just had to change the bit about every 45 seconds or so, just like these little buffer wheels here, which are probably my favorite accessory for this whole build. But again, each one of these just did not last very long. I was getting pretty frustrated because it felt like I was going through one of these wheels every freaking minute or so. So I told Scott to get a timer going and we would see how long one of these actually lasts. And as it turns out, it was not every minute. Each one of these lasted roughly 40 seconds or so, which was pretty frustrating considering I was here for probably 2 to 3 hours. So I think the tooth here is actually looking pretty good, but like I said, I want to go all the way. I want this to be a full bass boat shine. I want this to be the level 5 polish that your dentist upcharges you $60 to torture your gums for 20 minutes and make your mouth feel like it's full of sand when he's done. I want this to be all the way. I really wish I actually knew how to polish professionally because some of that content is so freaking satisfying. I follow a guy, Summer Shine Supply on TikTok, and he will polish like an entire semi-wheel or an entire tank on a semi-truck. It is so freaking satisfying to watch, and he would probably not be overly impressed with how I'm doing this, but in the end, I feel like I kind of got my way there and was at least making it shiny. I just had to keep kind of playing around with these different wheels. That yellow one you can see was much stiffer, so I needed a little bit more aggressive of a cut. Throw on the black compound. Can't even remember if the black is an aggressive or a modest cut. Again, the Summer Shine Supply guy would probably know, but in the end, you see it's actually getting a little shinier. When I got to this stage on the tusk, I actually didn't do any polishing at all. What I did was I sanded it straight from 40 grit all the way up to 2000 grit. So 2000 grit actually gets you a pretty good shine. This is going to be even glossier than that, but the Mammoth tusk I thought was good at kind of a semi-gloss finish. Not quite this full bass boat shine, but still pretty good. I'm not quite done with either of these teeth just yet. Remember, I intentionally chose to use a lighter colored epoxy so it would accept a color a little bit better when it came to this stage. I did something similar on that Mammoth tusk, only this time I used an even lighter epoxy so it would blend in even better. And this is one of those seeing how the sausage is made processes that I could have probably left out, just showed you the finished product. Nobody would have ever said anything, but seeing that it's done with a Sharpie is just going to rub some people the wrong way. And I get it, but this I think is going to be the best solution. And I genuinely think this is how an art dealer or somebody would do it because you can see just how well that color blends in. And I am actually colorblind, so just imagine how good it would look if someone actually knew what they were doing. One thing I've learned by having a house full of body parts, a house full of animal artifacts, you guys know what I mean. Anyway, one thing I've learned is that no matter what I do or say, people will get their grubby little hands all over my collectibles. That mammoth tusk that I have, people rub that thing like it is a goddamn genie in a bottle, no matter what I say to them. And luckily for me, I did seal it with N3 Nano before putting it on display in my house. So I'm doing the same thing with these mammoth teeth. And yes, N3 Nano is a furniture protectant that does an excellent job at protecting it from spills, stains, people who don't use coasters, all those things. But it should also do an amazing job protecting these fossils, or teeth and tusks.
So what's the next fossilized mammoth part you're gonna...
Well, first of all, as people in the comments have pointed out, these are not fossils. So they're just mammoth parts. I don't know, we've done all the cool stuff. Although I have thought about a mammoth femur, like table leg or something.
Yeah?
Very Flintstones, but
Yeah.
not opposed to it. I have always kind of geeked out on animal knowledge, and I remember when I was younger, I was learning about the woolly mammoth, and I learned that their extinction likely wasn't just due to climate change, and some scientists believe that it was in large part due to hunting pressure by humans, and I thought this was fascinating. So I went and I told one of my friends who was not an animal geek, and I was like, did you know that humans might have caused the extinction of the mammoth just from hunting pressure? I'm like, can you imagine what would have happened to them today if they'd lasted this long with all of our modern technology? And he looks at me and goes, we would have overhunted them? And I was like, yeah, I guess we would have probably just overhunted them. Anyway, that is the video you never thought you would sit through. 2 different ways to restore 2 very different mammoth teeth. And let me know which one you prefer, because you have to have an opinion.